infrastructure. Few critically examine the causes of pleasure of incomplete infrastructure projects that were initiated by present and previous governments in India. 200 words. Live Emantic introduction. Former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, in the dying days of his tenure, spoke of the need to inject animal spirits into the economy in order to revive and maintain its growth. If any one area badly needs a heavy dose of such an injection, it's the planning and implementation of projects. India's record in this respect is very dismal indeed. Projects are launched without adequate ground preparation as to how much land will be required and where it will come from, or if the necessary money is available. In many instances, there's a lack of cooperation at the state level, which is a big hurdle since land acquisition is the state's business and not that of the central government. Non-availability of funds from private developers and financial institutions is also responsible for major delays. Poor project selection due to an optimism bias in project planning and forecasting, a tendency to favor investing in new assets over maintenance spending, a high project complexity due to over-specification and over-design, capacity constraints, informality and corruption in infrastructure project delivery, and lack of performance pressure. Though external factors like the meltdown in the financial world of the Western economies carried over to the real sector in developing economies, like India, plethora of hurdles. Either the tendering process is incomplete, or the terms and conditions are unclear, or lengthy litigations and local political interference, or simply a lack of policy and management coordination. Many a times environmental clearance delays, protest by the displaced populations, hurdles due to local politics is responsible way forward. The tremendous cost overruns in infrastructure projects can be mainly attributed to a few but decisive factors that are systemic in nature. Of central importance is a more careful selection of those infrastructure projects that yield the highest economic and social returns and do not reflect political deliberations. This requires good governance and risk management practices because poorly defined projects almost always deliver suboptimal results, no matter how well they are executed. Consequently, improving the institutional capacity, namely the ability to design, select, procure and implement infrastructure projects effectively, is crucial. What is needed are independent planning and economic institutions that plan projects with discipline, weigh between maintenance spending and investing into new infrastructure assets, provide technical assistance to scale up infrastructure spending, and implement formal internal control processes to avoid risks like scope creep and corruption. Large infrastructure projects attract corruption in the form of bribery and kickbacks, the use of inferior materials as well as poor workmanship and outright theft. As a result, greater transparency and accountability structures are of fundamental importance to reduce the waste in infrastructure provision, particularly for large and complex projects in which many different people with overlapping control competencies are involved. www.insightsindia.com 29 www.insightsays.com. Few critically discuss the features of NIDIA Draft National Energy Policy DNEP. 200 words. BPW NIDIA Draft National Energy Policy DNEP, which was finally unveiled in June for public comments, has some ambitious objectives, such as universal access to electricity on a 24/7 basis and clean cooking fuel for all, and some excellent recommendations to promote renewables and tackle energy poverty. The salient features of DNEP are as follows. I focus on energy independence through rationalization of costs, subsidy and boost to renewable sector. IIB aim to produce 75 GW energy from the renewable sector till 2022. II emphasis on transition from the coal to clean energy for domestic use. IB focus on the infrastructure development, i.e. the projects like TAPI to development the gas pipelines. Criticism: DNEP has failed to consider the possibility of significantly reducing the role of fossil fuels. Instead of peak oil supply, a concept that had traction until a few years ago, we now face the possibility of peak oil demand. There is no agreement on when it will happen, but it is more than likely it may be around 2040. The DNEP has no mention of peak oil demand and its implications for India. The DNEP discusses electric vehicles only in passing. It does not discuss the possibility of India halting the production of vehicles with internal combustion engines and transiting to X. Such a shift over time would reduce oil demand considerably. The DNEP should have developed at least one scenario to assess the impact of such a dramatic transformation of the auto sector on oil refining, oil demand, the power sector and energy security. DNEP does mention problems of governance. It does not elaborate on such an important issue of energy sector subsidy. The report has too many suggestions. Most of these recommendations are old. It would have been more useful and productive if the DNEP had selected and concentrated on a few critical ones. The 4 key objectives driving the DNEP are: banish energy poverty by providing energy at an affordable price, improve energy security and independence, greater sustainability, and economic growth. No attempt has been made in the report to optimize decision-making while selecting different sources of energy based on multiple criteria like the 4 mentioned here. The DNEP emphasizes ever-increasing energy consumption and wants to lay the foundation for India to match the energy consumption parameters of the developed world over a long period. This is most unfortunate. It does not make sense for India to imitate the patterns of energy consumption in the developed world in the name of promoting development. In contrast, India should set a shining example to the world by promoting its civilizational value of simple living, high thinking, and thereby contribute to attempts to limit the rise in average temperatures to 2 degrees C or lower as stated in the Paris Agreement on Climate Change. In conclusion, then IATF should reconsider some aspects, have a full-blown scenario analysis, select a few critical strategies, and present a roadmap for their implementation. To critically analyze the trends in energy scenario in the Middle East. Also examine what lessons could India learn from these countries in management of energy. 200 words. Live Ementic introduction. The Middle East is a transcontinental region centered on Western Asia and Egypt in North Africa. The Middle East generally has a hot, arid climate, with several major rivers providing irrigation to support agriculture in limited areas such as the Nile Delta in Egypt, the Tigris and Euphrates watersheds of Mesopotamia, and most of what is known as www.insightsinIndia.com 30 www.insightsays.com. The Fertile Crescent. Most of the countries that border the Persian Gulf have vast reserves of crude oil, with monarchs of the Arabian Peninsula in particular benefiting economically from petroleum exports. Energy details in Middle East. Energy in the Middle East describes energy and electricity production, consumption, and import in the Middle East. Energy policy of the Middle East will describe the politics of the Middle East related to energy more in detail. Energy export from the Middle East is around 12,228 TWh. The major exporters were Saudi Arabia 37.2%, Qatar 14.3%, and Iran 12.9%. Largest share of oil production was in the Middle East, 24 million barrels daily, for 31% of global production. Middle Eastern countries possess about 41% of natural gas reserves. Major energy companies in the Middle East include Saudi Aramco, Qatar Petroleum, Kuwait Petroleum Corporation KPC, and National Iranian Oil Company NIOC. Analysis of energy resources in Middle East. There has been a substantial rise in the consumption of energy in Middle East countries. In the 10 years through 2016, consumption rose by 25 billion cubic feet BC at the day, much more than in both the US, despite its shale boom, and China. Governments pursued energy-intensive industrialization, seeking to diversify their economies into sectors where they had a competitive advantage: petrochemicals, aluminum, steel, and cement. There has been huge increase in demand and inefficiency due to subsidized provision of oil and natural gas to citizens of the many Gulf nations. Relatively low oil prices have led to subdued growth, even recession in places, and expatriate populations in parts of the Gulf have shrunk as state employers are told to save money. There is less money for flashy new infrastructure. The oil and gas price downturn has made governments aware of the exorbitant cost of their subsidies. By reducing the gap between local regulated rates and international prices, it has paradoxically made them easier to reform. Higher natural gas prices and a shortage of domestic supply have led Middle East governments to turn to alternative sources. The UAE's large nuclear power program is set to begin generating soon. Along with turning more towards nuclear source, many Middle Eastern countries are exploring the option of renewable energy. Conclusion: all these changes are new to the Middle Eastern region. Being the conventional hub of oil and natural gas, Many economic and political factors are leading to the change in the energy policy of the many Middle Eastern countries. The private companies as well as trading nations